Welcome back to Season 2 of the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and I am so grateful that you're joining us. When I started this podcast last year, my primary goal was to normalize the experience of imposter syndrome, to make it easier for us to talk about, and to access the support that we deserve. I am so grateful to everyone who has shared their stories with me, and I'm fascinated by the linkages between imposter syndrome and so many other facets of our lives. The conversations that we had last season led us in so many powerful directions. I'm excited to continue these conversations in Season 2. As always, if you have a story to share, please reach out to me. I would love to interview you. And if I can ever support you on your own imposter syndrome journey, I'd love to connect on that too. Thanks again for being here. Welcome, Shelley. I'm so excited to talk to you today. And before we jump in, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on your podcast, Kim. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a bit about myself and, how imposter syndrome, I guess, impacts my life. And so I'm a somewhat recent graduate. I finished my master's in human geography in the spring of 2020. I can't believe it's been like a year now. And so right now I'm doing some qualitative research, and I'm really interested in people and their stories and the intersections of like people and how they interact with their environments, whether it's like social, cultural, economic, so on and so forth. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to find kind of, where I want to go direction after life, after like graduating. And so that's a bit about me.
That's great. That sounds fascinating. I've always been motivated by people as well, and really understanding what makes them tick and how their environments influence them. So that sounds like really interesting work.
Thank you.
Sure. I wanted to start just by asking you a couple of standard questions. What does imposter syndrome mean to you, and how, if at all, has it shown up in your life?
Yeah. So I think first, imposter syndrome for me is just feeling, I guess, inadequate in some way, or like you're not enough in a certain area. And I feel like it could affect like a lot of different areas of your life. Like I know people on your podcast have talked a lot about it, like in the work environment, maybe as like a woman in a male dominated field. And I don't really have a lot of career experience yet since I am a new grad. But for me, I've definitely experienced it more noticeably recently as I've been job searching. So I've been feeling like, I'm not qualified enough, like I don't have enough work experience, or if I do have experience, it's not like really aligned in the right field of what I want to go into, and just feeling like I'm missing out on some compared to other people. They might have different qualifications. They might have done like, I don't know, another degree or specialized in something. So I feel like it's come up in that way. And also just I felt it while I was a student. I feel like in grad school, you're surrounded by a lot of other people who are very educated. And so I was doing my master's and I was interacting, with professors and then PhD students. And so I was like, everyone feels like so much smarter than me. So kind of just having imposter syndrome there as well academically. But I think also it's shown up in my personal life, and I've kind of noticed it more over the last few years or several years. So I'm a transracial adoptee, meaning I was born in China and I was adopted by my mom, who's a white single Jewish mother. And so I feel like I didn't really realize it when I was a kid, but it's kind of happened more in my young adult life, where I just have this feeling of not being Asian enough because I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. I had mostly white friends growing up, and just being disconnected from my birth culture kind of made me feel like I didn't know how to speak the language. I didn't know kind of the cultural foods, or I didn't know traditions, or there's just so much that I still feel disconnected in some ways. So that still contributes to me feeling like an imposter sometimes, but I think I'm working on getting better at it and realizing that, there's not one way to be Asian. Like just because I don't know a lot about my culture. Like I can start learning now, but that doesn't take away from my identity. And so that's something that's come up, yeah, more in my personal life as well.
I'm really grateful to you for sharing that, because we have talked a lot about imposter syndrome in a workplace context, but much less about it in an identity context like you're describing.
Hmm.
And I am sure that there are a lot of people who can relate to what you're saying in some way or another. They're certainly not going to have the same specifics of your story, but when you said not being Asian enough, that really struck me. I'm sure there are a lot of people who feel like they're straddling different types of identity groups and how to navigate that. Can you say more about what that feels like for you?
Yeah, it definitely, like, I noticed it mostly when I went to university because that was the first time that I was, I feel like universities in general, much more diversity there. And there's like so many clubs. And so in my first year, since I was commuting and living at home, I really was worried about making friends. So I was like, oh, I really need to put myself out there. I was, more shy in high school and I didn't get as involved maybe in some of the clubs I wanted to. So I thought this is my chance to kind of branch out and it'll be a good way to get to know people. So I noticed that there was a lot of clubs for Asians or cultural groups, things like that. So I thought, oh, maybe this is like the time that I could connect more with other Asians, learn more about my culture. But I think it was internal. The people seemed very nice at the booths when I asked kind of about their club and what they do. But then they started talking about it being like, oh, yeah, it's really nice to be amongst a group of people. You have the shared childhood and like culture, the language. You can like, there's all those things you have in common. And when they were describing the club, I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to fit in here because I really don't have a lot of shared lived experience with these people who look like me, but I was raised quite differently. And I mean, maybe, yeah, we have some hobbies in common, but it just felt like, I wouldn't belong there. And I mean, I'm sure they would have been accepting. So it's not that I felt that they were excluding me. Is much more internal. I guess that's when the imposter syndrome was showing up. And so I ended up, since my mom's Jewish, I was like, oh, maybe I should learn more about that culture. So I ended up joining a Jewish sorority and I met some great friends who I'm still close to now. But even there in that space, I didn't feel like Jewish enough either. And so I wasn't raised very religiously, but my mom always said, well, you are Jewish because it's passed through the mother and, I adopted you and I'm Jewish. And so you are as well. But, my friends had gone to Jewish day school or they had been camp counselors at Jewish kids camps or, they celebrated all the holidays with their family and they followed, the traditions and stuff. Not all of them were very religious, but it's just they still also had kind of this shared knowledge and like family experience and food and all these things that I also felt like I couldn't really relate to at times. So at least for some reason there, I felt more comfortable. Like at least I joined it and I learned more about the culture, the way of life, the religion. And then kind of, I was in that for 5 years. And then I part of me thinks, I should have joined like that Asian or Chinese club. Like I should have also explored that more. But once I graduated my undergrad, that's when I was kind of like, what? I mean, it's not too late. I can still do it. In my fourth year of my undergrad, I decided to do my thesis on the lived experiences of other Chinese adoptees who are in Canada. And that was kind of my first time reconnecting with adoptees because I grew up somewhat connected. My mom would bring me to events. And so as a kid, though, I don't think I really like understood. They were just like friends. I didn't really connect like, oh, we're both adopted. We have this shared experience. Like I wasn't thinking that deeply into it. So when I did my undergrad, now like I'm an adult and I'm talking to other adult adoptees. And so it was me realizing, oh, wow, like, yeah, I'm not alone in feeling this. One of my themes was talking about kind of how do you balance the identity, your Chinese and your Canadian side, and how do you feel like you fit in different spaces. And so in talking to other adoptees, I was like, okay, this is definitely something that a lot of other adoptees feel as well, like you're kind of stuck in between. And since I've become more open and talking about my experiences, I've realized, like you said, there's other people who can relate that are not adopted. I've like realized that second generation immigrants, like they can sometimes relate because they feel a bit disconnected from their culture at times. And also mixed race individuals sometimes feel caught in between. So it is something that I've noticed. Again, it's just this feeling of like, oh, I'm not alone in this. Like other people also have experienced this imposter syndrome in terms of like cultural, racial identity.
Yeah, that's so fascinating too that, so it sounds like you've found another dimension to your identity through the piece of being adopted, right? And being able to form connections there and be able to talk openly with people about your experience and their share, sort of the shared experiences that you've had there. I can imagine that that's, like you said, kind of brought some peace or a new way of thinking about yourself. How are you feeling right now at this stage of your journey?
I think right now, yeah, I'm trying to be more accepting of myself. Um, and yeah, realizing that I do have to feel confident in my identity and then in being comfortable, like, in my own skin and with my experiences and this feeling of like, you're a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you don't have to be like 100% in this box or that box. Like you can, I don't know, I've heard some people describe it as like kind of like a hybrid. But just realizing that that's okay. So then, if there are situations where I feel like I'm being excluded from a certain community, whether it's like Asian or Jewish or just that it won't affect me as much because I'll be like, you know what, I'm okay because I don't feel like I'm less than. I can feel confident in myself. So I mean, it's something that I feel like I have come, like I've grown over time since, when I was in first year university, and I was very much like, oh, I don't belong anywhere and I don't know where I fit in. So I've definitely kind of had this self-discovery journey, and really am trying to just be fully accepting and be okay with, even if I don't end up learning like a whole lot and dive in and like learn language and do all this stuff, like that's still okay. Like I'm still Asian enough. Um, and so, yeah, again, it's still a process, but I think I'm definitely getting better. And and just being, yeah, talking with other adoptees and even talking with my friends and family, just knowing that I do have people who support me and who like accept me for who I am. And like then other adoptees, when I talk to them, they like, they understand, they get it. And so kind of just that validation of being like, yes, other people, they do accept me for how I am. And like, I accept myself for how I am. So just, that's where I am right now.
That's really good to hear. I'm so glad that you have found that type of support. And I'm curious too whether you have had any conversations with people in either the Asian community or the Jewish community that you were talking about, where you've been vulnerable with them about your feelings. Have you ever opened up to anybody about these, you know, these feelings that you've had or the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, I've definitely been opening up a lot more recently because when I was younger, I didn't really think about my identity at all. And I definitely didn't think about being an adoptee. And it's just kind of like, oh, yeah, that's just something that happened to me like many years ago. And that's just one piece of my life. But now I'm like, you know what? No, it does kind of affect other areas. Like it's not just something that happened in the past. And like, oh, yeah, that's just how I got to Canada. It is something that's more kind of ingrained, and it sometimes shows up in little ways every day. But so yeah, I've become more comfortable now talking about it, opening up. And I've also tried to, I mean, it's easier to post about it sometimes and express myself online. So sometimes like I'll kind of share my thoughts in a post. Like November is National Adoption Awareness Month. So this past year I was like a bit more vocal online with my social media. And so people I'm connected with there, I feel like for the first time, we're kind of seeing that side of me and hearing my experiences. And so that felt good because, some people commented or privately messaged me, and some people were like, oh, I didn't know this about you, but like, thank you so much for sharing about your story. And, I guess being vulnerable. And so I've had conversations personally with friends, like some of that has led to kind of private conversations. And that's when I realized, that people I know maybe who again are like second generation immigrants, like they can kind of relate. And yeah, I've had like, some of my friends, like one of my Jewish friends, she reached out and she was like, have you ever experienced, because there's like a rise right now in anti-Asian hate crimes. And so she stumbled upon an article that was talking about Jewish Asians and kind of speaking up about, if they felt excluded or anything in the Jewish community. And I haven't, again, I think a lot of it's been internal where it's me feeling like I don't belong. I haven't experienced a lot of like people actually directly being like, you don't belong here. But, I have told her, I was like, there's times that just in the sorority, for example, like there's just all these things that you have in common. And I feel like I'm trying to catch up. It's like, oh, I spent so much time not knowing all this or growing up with this. It's like, now I need to catch up really fast. And so, I've been open with that. And then I've talked to like one friend who's an international student. And so kind of, I was, she was very interested in my experience because she was born in China during the one-child policy. And that's, I think, a large reason of why I am adopted because of that. And so it's just very interesting, like comparing stories. And she wanted to learn more about my experiences and I wanted to learn more about her experiences. So it's definitely led to a lot of really interesting conversations. I feel like I've gotten to know some of my friends better at the same time, and then they're trying to get to know me better. So it does feel really good to kind of open up again with people I trust and sharing a certain amount of information. And then online too, it's nice because then sometimes I don't have to have those like deeper conversations and go, into my whole life story, but I can share a little bit of information and then people are like, oh, that's really nice. And then, as however much I'm comfortable sharing at a time, I can kind of share bits and pieces here and there.
Wow. Yeah, that's so powerful. I mean, that willingness to be vulnerable certainly feels risky. It requires trust, but there's so much value to doing it, as you've experienced, right? Is that something that you would recommend to people who are listening and thinking, wow, she's telling my story right now?
Yeah, I think definitely it is. It can be good to kind of open up and be vulnerable again with people you trust and you're comfortable with. Like my mom is very supportive, and I've become very involved in the adoptee community over quarantine because I've had lots of free time. So with that, I've kind of discovered this group of people again who experience a lot of the same things I've been going through, and I've been having more like, I guess, leadership roles within the adoptee community, and I've just made so many connections. And yeah, my mom thinks it's great. She's very happy, and like she, her and I have had some conversations too, talking about my experiences, and then me asking her questions, and so it's been really great in that way. So it definitely, either if it's a family member or friend, but just if you ever feel like you need to talk it out with someone because it could really help, then I would definitely recommend doing that. Even if they don't have the shared exact experiences, I think if there's someone you trust and they care about you, then they would be open to hearing your perspective. And, hopefully they'd be able to provide kind of some support and validation, and just so that that you're being heard and seen.
I think that's really, really helpful and really good advice. I'm curious if it's okay. You mentioned the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. And I know that you're in Canada, obviously here in the US, this has been a conversation most prominently in the last couple of weeks with everything that's been going on here. How has your experience been throughout this rise of anti-Asian sentiment? And I'm assuming that it's not unique to the US, but I'm curious, just based on everything else that you've shared, if what your personal experience has been during this time.
Yeah, at first I feel like it was very confusing. I mean, actually, it's still a little bit confusing because being disconnected from the Asian community, it makes it feel like this is happening to people that look like me. Like I haven't experienced any direct forms of racism where I am in Southern Ontario. But I know that it does happen here. I've talked to some friends, or they've maybe been a bit more vocal, and I know that, they've experienced some things. And so I don't know, maybe I've been kind of sheltered. It's just where I happen to live. It's not like a big city. And I mean, even though it's like predominantly white, I also, it's quarantine. I just haven't left my house a lot in the last year. So yeah, I personally haven't experienced anything, but kind of knowing that it's happening and not that far away from where I am, again, because some of my friends who live not too far, they've experienced some things. So it's kind of like there's these things happening to people that I care about and people that look like me. I haven't personally experienced, and I also have felt, disconnected from the Asian community. So it's very, like, growing up as a transracial adoptee, I felt very white, and I didn't really realize, like, I didn't really know what it meant to be Asian. And I think I'm still figuring that out as well. And so kind of just, it seems surprising. It's like a wake up call, like, oh yeah, I definitely am Asian, and people on the street, they won't see me as an adopted Asian who was raised by a white Jewish mother. Like they don't know that, I've lived here most of my life, and they don't know that I don't know the language. And like they're not going to know all of that. They're going to make assumptions based on what I look like. And to them, like if there are people out there like that I might encounter on the street kind of thing, if they have racist thoughts, that it doesn't matter that that I'm an adoptee. They'll just see me as Asian, and then I don't know, unfortunate things might happen. So it's kind of just weird, because for a while I had this disconnect with, like, I feel this way inside, but people see me this way. So it's sometimes surprising when people like stereotype me, because it's just, I'm not, I really don't fit into like an Asian stereotype in a lot of ways. People will be like, oh, your parents must be really strict. And they're saying that, because they think I have Asian parents, or they'll say these things. And I have to be like, oh yeah, like people think these things about, people in my racial group. And it's like, in a lot of ways, I don't fit into these things that people are going to assume about me. And then with the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, it's like I have to remember that's how people see me. Yeah. And so even though my friends and my family, they know my experiences, and obviously, like, people I'm surrounding myself with accept me, but then just that I have to remind myself, like, that there's some people out there who might not like me because of my race, which is just kind of like, it was a wake up call moment. And then a part of me is, wanted to speak out, wanted to kind of do something, because I'm like, I want to help people and spread awareness. But then again, not being a part of the Asian community, I mean, people who are speaking out, they're saying, like, oh, I know in the States, a lot of elders have been specifically targeted. And I don't have, like, I don't know, I'm not worried about my mom, or, I don't have like Asian grandparents. I don't have people in my family that I'm worried for, because I have a younger sister who's an adoptee as well. But it's just different, because some of the people speaking out saying, like, they've experienced racism, and, or their family members. And I do wonder, like, should I be more worried about my safety? But I haven't had personally a reason to be, but I know that there's violence happening, even in Canada, for sure. So yeah, it's been a lot of processing, and I guess me feeling like, okay, I am separated a little bit from the Asian community. I can still speak out on it. I don't want to take away, like, I want to maybe amplify other people who are speaking out about it, who maybe do have more a lived experience with experiencing racism, and it maybe has impacted them and their family in more ways. So I definitely don't want to take away from those people who are speaking out, but then realizing that it is okay for me to say something, or at least to kind of show my support, even though I feel disconnected.
I can't thank you enough for how honest and open you're being right now, and sharing some really complex feelings and experiences. I mean, I just, from how you're describing it, I can only imagine how challenging it is to navigate some of this complexity. And I'm just really grateful that you are willing to share that with me, and certainly with this audience as well. And I wonder, once again, for anybody who's listening and identifying in some way with what you're saying, is there anything else that you would recommend that they think about, or anything else that you've learned along the way that you think would be helpful to share?
Hmm. Yeah, I think besides the accept yourself and surround yourself with people that will support you and, open up when you're comfortable. I think, yeah, just, I mean, because I would want to tell my younger self, it's okay that you're in between, and just kind of provide myself just that validation. And and again, you don't have to, it's not like a checklist. It's not like if you do all these things, then you'll be Asian enough. It's really just like you are, like I am Asian because I was born Asian, and it's not like a a process of trying to become more of something, and just trying to also do it for myself, because I think there's sometimes I felt pressured, like from, again, it comes from inside me, but it feels like, oh, I have to be more Asian because if I hang out, with people and it's like I don't know how to use chopsticks, it's gonna look, you know, bad on me. It's gonna be like, oh, what kind of Asian are you if you can't use chopsticks? Or like, oh, sometimes there's people who will assume I know like Mandarin or something, and they'll come up to me speaking in Mandarin. Maybe they're, I don't know, asking for help in some way. And then I feel like, oh crap, I'm letting this other Asian person down. Like I can't help them. And like, I'm an imposter. I look like I should know how to speak the language. And then they're going to assume that I just didn't care to learn it when I mean, I tried, and it's very difficult.
Mhm.
And my mom even put me in Mandarin classes when I was a kid, but I didn't really like do that well in it. I just viewed it as a social thing, and it's hard to like practice, outside of the classes if you don't really like have anyone to practice with. So it's, I mean, I guess like I did try a little bit, but it is much harder if you don't have someone to teach you, like, within your family. So it's just this idea of like other people are gonna think I'm not Asian enough, like in comparison, and whether it's friends, again, it's been more me thinking that inside my head, if anything. And I've had some people say, slightly, I mean, comments where I guess they just like weren't thinking through, and I don't blame people. Like I do think people just don't maybe know a lot about the experiences of adoptees, so they might say things and not realize that to some it could be a little hurtful. But again, if it's someone close to me and I'm like, okay, they do care about me, like maybe I could just correct them. And I've had someone, there was like a trivia question, and it was about, I think, something about China. And then they looked at me because they're like, oh, I think they're thinking I knew the answer. And I was like, I don't know a lot about China, like the history of it. Like I'm trying to learn more. But yeah. And they're like, oh, sorry, I forgot you're not actually Chinese. And then I was like, well, I am actually. And they're like, oh, sorry, you know what I mean? Like you don't have family from China. And I was like, well, technically, I do have family in China. I don't know them. But my birth family, is from China. So it's just like, correcting people. And again, I know that especially if they're close friends or family, that, you know, that they don't mean to make me feel like not enough. But there's just certain things, that people might say. Or again, sometimes it is strangers that don't know me well. And then it's a little bit more like, okay, you don't know me well enough to be questioning my identity like this, especially with my name, like not having an Asian last name. People, if they meet me, but then they see my name, they're like, oh, I've had a coworker once say, you don't look like a Rottenberg. And then thankfully, like one of my other coworkers, she was like, and what does a Rottenberg look like? So kind of just challenging, I guess, that's like a whole nother thing, just the name. But yeah, so just to try to be accepting of yourself, and to a certain degree accepting of others, but also it's okay to kind of like call, but I mean, I personally try to do it in a nice way, um but just so that sometimes people don't know. And I just like being on this podcast is just trying to like raise awareness, so that people can, interact with others just in a more thoughtful way moving forward.
I I'm so grateful. You and I share a similar value there too. I'm always looking to raise awareness, and identify ways that we can connect with each other. more deeply and more authentically. I know that word is overused, but I'm just really so, I can't say enough about how much I appreciate you're willing to share your story today. And, certainly my own experience with imposter syndrome is different from yours. But one of the things that you have said a few times along the way is that it's not necessarily that other people are thinking this, but that you're thinking that, right? And it's kind of in your head. And I know that you've encountered some, what we can call them microaggressions, or we could call them ignorance of some form, right, in the comments that other people have made. But I do think it's really helpful to remind ourselves when we feel this way, that just because we feel this way doesn't mean it's truth, right? And I love that you were willing to kind of step outside of yourself and your own experience to build connection with others and find peace through sharing your story and through sort of hearing other people's stories. And I think it's incredibly inspirational.
And it's quarantine has really given me that time to reflect, to kind of unpack my own feelings and then connect with people online. And it's so meaningful to be able to do that when it's much harder in person, to make those really deep connections and get to know people on another level. So it's been very nice, being able to reach out, talk about my experiences again with either other adoptees or friends and family, or whether I'm sharing it on social media, but making those connections feels extra special because it's harder to kind of connect in those ways right now.
Yeah, that is one of the few silver linings of this time that we've all been through over the last year, is the ability to connect in these different ways. So I'm so glad that you've been able to leverage the technology for this purpose. And I know you've pretty much already answered this question, but I just wanted to see if there's anything else that you want to share about what you're hoping people will take away from your story today.
I guess just, if anyone listening can resonate with that in-between feeling or not feeling like enough in terms of your identity, that just to know that there definitely are people out there who will accept you. Like if for some reason you're not in a supportive, safe space right now, I mean, it took me a while to find that community where then I could open up and learn more about adoption, my identity, and connecting with others, realizing that we have a lot in common, but we're also quite different and have different feelings and experiences within our community. But I mean, that happened, within the last year. And again, largely attributed to all this time I have because of quarantine. But yeah, so just that, like, there are people out there who will understand you and who will accept you. And so just if for some reason you haven't found that yet, that just to be hopeful, because there's just so many people out there in the world, and there are people, forming communities, whether it's in person or online, and any type of group where it's like you feel like you don't fit in, or in some way you might be marginalized. Like there are people making connections, and you just have to try to find that group. And so I am hopeful that people eventually, you'll find where you fit in, and you can make that community yourself. And to really try to surround yourself with people who are going to support you, because if there are people who have directly excluded you in some way, don't, it's easier maybe said than done, but really try not to surround yourself with those people, and just surround yourself with people who are going to empower you and uplift you and see you for who you are, and not make you feel like you have to change yourself, and who are going to be on your personal journey of growth and self-discovery, whether it's related to identity or something else a little bit different. But I think that would be my advice.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for bringing such vulnerability and such inspiration to this conversation. I'm really, really grateful that you're here.
Thank you so much for this podcast. I mean, I haven't listened to all of your episodes, but I've listened to some of them and hearing, again, like even if I can't fully relate, if it's something like them experiencing imposter syndrome in a job or things like that, it's just the overarching theme of experiencing imposter syndrome is something I can relate to. So, having the chance to listen to other people's experiences, through this platform that you've created has been really nice and helpful. And so I appreciate you allowing me to speak. And then also, just the idea to create this was amazing.
Thanks again for listening today. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome and you'd like additional support, check out the show notes for more resources or contact me directly. I would love to help you. And if you'd like to tell your story, I would love to interview you. You will find my contact info in the show notes, so reach out anytime. Thanks again.